So, what's the future of feminism? According to the manifesto, Feminism for the 99%, the movement is standing at a major crossroads. We're facing a really stark choice between two completely different paths. And, the authors argue this choice isn't just for feminists. It's going to shape the future for pretty much everyone. Okay, and this slide, it just perfectly nails the manifesto's whole argument. On one side, you've got that whole lean in idea, right? The goal is to get more women into those top jobs running companies and countries. But on the other side, you see a much more radical demand. Let's build a society that's totally free of oppression and violence. The manifesto is basically saying, look, these aren't just slightly different ways to get to the same place. No, these are two completely separate destinations.
All right, so let's dig into that first path. The manifesto kicks things off with a pretty sharp critique of what it calls liberal feminism. And the way they see it, this is a kind of feminism that's actually become, well, pretty comfortable with the system just the way it is. And they have this killer phrase to sum it all up: equal opportunity domination. Think about that for a second. The argument here is that this vision of feminism doesn't actually liberate everyone. It just makes sure that a handful of women get an equal shot at being the boss, inside a system that fundamentally doesn't change at all.
So, what's the big problem here, according to the manifesto? Well, here's how they break it down. First, the focus gets super narrow, right? It's all about a few privileged women cracking that glass ceiling. The goal becomes a kind of meritocracy, not really equality for everybody. But here's the real kicker, the core of their critique: this idea of outsourcing oppression. For one woman to lean in at her high-powered job, she often has to lean on another, lower-paid woman, often a migrant, to handle the childcare and housework. So the manifesto concludes that this whole approach ends up tying feminism to elitism and individualism. And that, they argue, gives the whole movement a bad name.
The authors actually point to a specific moment where they say this disconnect just became impossible to ignore: Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. They call it the Waterloo of liberal feminism. Their argument is that her campaign didn't manage to fire up a majority of women voters because it perfectly illustrated that gap between one elite woman's success and any real tangible improvement in the lives of most women. So, with that brand of feminism declared, in their words, bankrupt, the manifesto makes a hard pivot. It turns to that other path, the alternative vision that they see bubbling up from a powerful new wave of activism all around the world. And look, this alternative isn't just some abstract theory. It's totally grounded in real-world events. The authors point to this incredible wave of women-led strikes that just erupted across the globe. It started in places like Poland and Argentina, but then it just snowballed. It became this massive transnational movement with millions of people hitting the streets, really reviving the radical roots of International Women's Day. And what was so different about this? Well, at the very heart of this new movement was a complete reinvention of the idea of a strike. It wasn't just about walking off the job at a factory. It was about withdrawing from all that unpaid domestic and emotional labor, too. We're talking housework, childcare, even the pressure to just smile. By doing this, the strikers made all that invisible, essential work suddenly visible. The very work that society completely relies on, but that our economic system just refuses to put a value on. So what's the philosophy driving this whole thing? The manifesto puts it, well, pretty bluntly. Their answer to lean-in feminism is kick-back feminism. It's not about trying to find your place within the system. It's about pushing back hard against the system itself. And this next quote just drives that point home. We have no interest in breaking the glass ceiling while leaving the vast majority to clean up the shards. I mean, wow. The focus shifts completely from individual success to collective well-being. It's not about a few women getting through that ceiling anymore. It's about asking why the ceiling and the whole hierarchy it stands for is even there to begin with, especially when most people are just left behind to deal with the fallout. Okay, so what's the big idea behind this kickback feminism? To really get it, we've got to dive into the manifesto's core argument about capitalism and this really key concept they use called social reproduction. The starting point for the authors is this: what we've all been experiencing lately isn't just a financial crisis. It's not just about banks or the stock market. They see it as a much, much deeper crisis of the entire system. We're talking about an economy, an ecology, and a social fabric that are all stretched to their absolute breaking point. And this leads us right to what is probably the most crucial idea in the whole manifesto: social reproduction. So what is that? It's basically all the work of people making. I mean, think about it. A factory can't run without workers, right? But workers don't just magically appear at the factory gates. They have to be born, raised, fed, clothed, educated, cared for when they're sick. All of that stuff, most of it unpaid and totally invisible, that is social reproduction.
Okay, so how does this connect to gender oppression? The manifesto lays it out in 3 simple steps. Step 1. Capitalism draws a hard line between profit-making, which happens at work, and people-making, which happens at home. Step 2. It assigns that people-making work primarily to women. And step 3, this is the really critical part. It completely devalues this essential work. It treats it as if it's just free, a natural resource that the economy can tap into without ever having to pay for it. So, the big conclusion here is pretty radical. The authors are arguing that sexism isn't just some leftover prejudice or a cultural issue that happens to exist alongside capitalism. No, from their perspective, it's actually a structural necessity. It's hardwired right into the system's DNA because of this fundamental split between making things and making people. So, if that's the diagnosis, what's the cure? What's the path forward? Well, the final section of the manifesto lays out a strategy, and it's all about uniting the feminist struggle with a whole bunch of other movements for social justice. And this vision really expands the fight way beyond what you might think of as traditional women's issues. Let's take gender violence, for instance. The manifesto argues that just calling for more police and more prisons, what some people call carceral feminism, really isn't the answer. Why? Because that approach often ends up hurting poor and racialized communities the most. Instead, they say real justice means giving people actual exit options, things like social housing, good public services, and economic support. And what that means is that the feminist movement has to link up with the fights for labor rights, anti-racism, and environmental justice. It has to be a unified front for the 99%. The ultimate goal is captured in that beautiful historic slogan from the old labor strikes, bread and roses. The bread part, that's all our basic material needs, decent wages, housing, healthcare, you name it. But the roses, that's the right to a life with dignity, with beauty, with liberation. And the manifesto's point is powerful. We have to fight for both. We can't settle for one without the other. And in the end, the manifesto leaves us with this one powerful, lingering image. It paints a picture of our world as a kind of runaway train, just hurtling towards disaster. And the choice it puts forward is this. Is feminism going to be a force that helps slam on the emergency brake? Or is it going to be a movement that's just focused on getting a few of its members a better seat in first class while the whole train speeds off a cliff?